there's one island that has like this crazy hole in the ground that was made by pirates. There's a television show about it. You know what I'm talking about?
The Curse of Oak Island.
And they have some crazy hole in the ground that they're trying to figure out how to get into, but there's all these weird little
booby traps and like all this crazy stuff.
Think of the greatest lost treasures in history. El Dorado, the Ark of the Covenant, the legendary Templar Horde. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as nothing more than myths. But what if one of those legends was hiding beneath an island in Nova Scotia? For more than 200 years, Oak Island has guarded one of history's most mysterious secrets. Generations of treasure hunters have searched its legendary money pit, battled underground flood tunnels, and risked fortunes trying to uncover what was deliberately buried beneath the ground. But now, something has changed. After years of drilling, scanning, and investigating, researchers reportedly detected a massive anomaly nearly 160 feet below the surface. Then came the discovery that changed everything: a possible sealed structure and a hidden chamber that appeared to contain something far more significant than an ordinary treasure. And what was reportedly found inside could completely rewrite the story of Oak Island and potentially connect the island to one of the greatest lost treasures in history. Before we reveal what was discovered, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this is one mystery you do not want to miss. Because the real question is no longer whether Oak Island contains a treasure. The question is, who buried it there, and what were they trying to hide? Inside the chamber, investigators reportedly discovered 3 enormous chests, remarkably preserved despite the centuries they had spent underground. And what was inside was even more astonishing: vast quantities of gold and silver coins. These weren't ordinary pirate doubloons. The coins appeared to be far older, rarer, and more historically significant. But the coins were only the beginning. Beside them were objects that could potentially change the entire story of Oak Island: ceremonial artifacts and a collection of mysterious scrolls covered in an unknown written language. Some of the artifacts reportedly displayed a distinctive cross associated with the Knights Templar. If authenticated, that would represent an extraordinary connection to one of history's most mysterious military orders. For years, the Templar theory has fascinated Oak Island researchers. Now, these reported discoveries appear to give that theory a completely new level of attention. The scrolls themselves may be even more important. Wrapped in what appears to be specially treated leather, they contain symbols and writing that researchers have so far been unable to identify. And that changes everything. Oak Island would no longer simply be the location of an extraordinary treasure hunt. It could potentially become an archaeological site capable of answering questions that have remained unanswered for centuries. The gold and silver would obviously be worth a fortune, but the information contained within those scrolls could be worth far more than any treasure. None of this happened overnight. The Lagina brothers spent years combining historical records, modern technology, geological surveys, drilling, and painstaking research to gradually uncover the island's secrets. And along the way, there were clues that many people overlooked: the lead cross, the mysterious coconut fibers, the unusual stone formations, the strange markers scattered around the island. Individually, each piece seemed insignificant, but together they may have formed a trail, a series of breadcrumbs pointing toward the location that investigators were eventually able to explore. And if the reported discovery is genuine, it doesn't just validate the work of the Lagina brothers. It also gives renewed significance to generations of researchers who refuse to abandon the Oak Island mystery. Because the biggest question has now changed. It's no longer simply, is there something buried on Oak Island? It's, what was it, who put it there, and why? And answering those questions could lead to a story far more complicated than anyone expected, because this may not be the end of the Oak Island mystery. It could be the beginning of an entirely new chapter. The flight from Europe. The reported discovery of possible Knights Templar artifacts inside a sealed underground chamber would represent far more than an incredible archaeological find. If independently verified, it could provide new evidence for one of the most controversial theories surrounding Oak Island. For decades, researchers have speculated that the Knights Templar may have played a role in the island's mystery. The theory suggests that members of the powerful medieval order, or people connected to them, could have transported enormous wealth and valuable religious objects across the Atlantic and eventually hidden them on Oak Island. Now, the reported artifacts have pushed that theory back into the spotlight. It's exactly the kind of historical mystery that fascinates people like Joe Rogan. Stories involving secret organizations, lost wealth, forgotten journeys, and clues that may have survived for centuries. But before we can understand why Oak Island became part of the Templar legend, we have to return to medieval Europe. The Knights Templar emerged during the Crusades in the early 12th century. Over the following 2 centuries, the order grew from a small group of warrior monks into an extraordinarily wealthy and influential organization. They developed sophisticated financial networks, controlled property across Europe, operated shipping routes, and accumulated enormous wealth. But their success eventually created enemies. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Templars had become so powerful that their influence was increasingly difficult for European rulers to ignore. One of their greatest opponents was King Philip IV of France, who was heavily indebted to the order. Then, in 1307, everything changed. Philip moved against the Templars, working with the Church to have members arrested and their possessions seized. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, large numbers of Templars were taken into custody across France. Their organization was eventually suppressed, but one enormous mystery remained. What happened to everything they had? Their wealth, documents, religious relics, and other valuables were scattered, seized, or simply disappeared from the historical record. And that disappearance is at the heart of the Oak Island theory. According to one popular hypothesis, part of the Templar fleet may have escaped Europe before the order was completely dismantled. One version of the story places their departure at La Rochelle, carrying valuable possessions and possibly sacred objects away from the reach of the French crown. But where did those ships go? That question has produced countless theories. Some accounts point toward Portugal, others suggest Scotland or different parts of Europe. The most dramatic version, however, proposes that some of the fugitives crossed the Atlantic long before Christopher Columbus made his famous voyage. And this is where Oak Island enters the story. One of the most frequently cited pieces of evidence is the mysterious lead cross discovered at Smith's Cove. Supporters of the theory have argued that its design and alleged dating could point toward a European origin and possibly a pre-Columbian presence. If that interpretation were ever independently confirmed, the implications would be enormous, because it would mean the Oak Island mystery might not simply be about buried treasure. It could be evidence of a forgotten journey across the Atlantic and a secret that someone went to extraordinary lengths to keep hidden. Now imagine finding a chamber containing symbols associated with the Knights Templar. Suddenly, the old theory takes on an entirely different level of intrigue. But why would the Templars choose Oak Island? The answer may lie in the island itself. Oak Island is isolated, naturally difficult to access, and positioned in a location that could have offered excellent protection for anyone trying to conceal something valuable. Its geological conditions also made it possible to construct deep underground structures. And then there's the money pit. Whatever its true origin, the complex engineering traditionally associated with the money pit is difficult to dismiss as the work of a few ordinary treasure hunters. The shafts, timber structures, water systems, and alleged flood defenses suggest extensive planning and considerable labor. Supporters of the Templar theory argue that this kind of organization fits what is known about the medieval order. The Templars were not simply warriors, they were also involved in constructing and managing impressive castles, fortifications, and religious buildings throughout Europe. Perhaps then, the goal wasn't merely to hide a treasure chest. Perhaps the objective was to create a secure, underground repository capable of protecting something valuable for generations. And clues across Oak Island continue to fuel that possibility. The unusual arrangement of stones, the formations that some interpret as a cross, and the complicated water channels associated with Smith's Cove have all become part of the larger mystery. Whether every feature was deliberately constructed for the same purpose remains uncertain, but taken together, they create an extraordinary picture of planning, labor, and engineering. That's the part of the story that makes the mystery so compelling. The treasure may have been valuable, but the effort required to protect it could have been even more remarkable. Instead of simply burying valuables and walking away, whoever created the underground system may have intended for it to remain inaccessible for generations. And if the reported Templar connection is ever independently verified, the implications would extend far beyond the value of the gold. It could suggest that Europeans reached North America much earlier than the traditional timeline allows. It could also raise new questions about medieval navigation, maritime travel, and how much knowledge existed about the Atlantic world before Columbus's famous voyage. In that scenario, the treasure itself would almost become secondary. The real prize would be evidence of a chapter in history that has been largely forgotten. And perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that what has been uncovered so far represents only the beginning. A feat of ancient power. The alleged discovery of a hidden chamber doesn't just raise questions about what was buried beneath Oak Island. It raises an even bigger question. How was such a complex underground system created in the first place? For many people, the simplest explanation has always been some form of pirate treasure, but the engineering associated with the money pit makes that explanation far less satisfying. Digging a hole and hiding a chest is one thing. Constructing an underground system designed to make that chest extremely difficult to recover is something else entirely. The money pit, whatever its true origin, has become famous because of this apparent complexity. Consider the depth alone. Historical accounts describe the original shaft as extending more than 160 feet underground, passing through dense glacial material made up of clay, sand, gravel, and rock. Excavating through that kind of ground is difficult even with modern machinery. Doing it manually would have required enormous amounts of time, physical labor, organization, and careful planning. But depth wasn't the only challenge. At various levels, historical accounts describe thick layers of oak timbers arranged at roughly 10-foot intervals. These structures may have provided support, but some interpretations suggest they also created additional barriers for anyone attempting to reach whatever was supposedly hidden below. Each layer would have meant more work, more time, and more obstacles. And then comes the feature that has made Oak Island famous, the flood tunnel system. According to the long-standing Oak Island accounts, underground channels connected the Money Pit area with Smith's Cove, allowing seawater to enter the excavation when deeper levels were reached. if deliberately engineered, such a system would have been an extraordinary defensive mechanism. The builders would have needed to understand the relationship between the underground passages, the surrounding terrain, and the movement of seawater. They would also have needed to prevent the tunnels from collapsing while ensuring that water could flow toward the shaft. That's a serious engineering challenge. Instead of using a simple lock or physical barrier, the builders would effectively have turned the surrounding environment into part of the security system. The ocean itself became the defense. And then there's Smith's Cove. The unusual artificial structures discovered there, including drainage features and layers of coconut fiber, have generated even more speculation. Some researchers have interpreted these remains as evidence of deliberate filtration and water management techniques. If that interpretation is correct, it suggests whoever constructed the system wasn't simply digging randomly into the ground. They were planning around water, they were controlling water, and they may have been designing the entire underground structure with one objective in mind, making sure that whatever was buried below would remain extremely difficult to reach. That is what makes Oak Island so fascinating. The mystery isn't only about a hidden treasure, it's about the extraordinary engineering that may have been created to keep that treasure hidden. The discovery of these fibers adds another layer to the mystery. They were not naturally occurring materials from Nova Scotia, which has led some researchers to argue that whoever constructed the site had access to resources coming from far beyond the island. That possibility makes the idea of a small group of ordinary pirates seem much harder to accept. Whatever the truth may be, the scale of the reported construction was enormous. And that's where the mystery becomes even more fascinating. How did the people who built this system acquire the knowledge needed to design it? Was this kind of engineering understood by a specialized group or secret organization? Could the Knights Templar have possessed technical knowledge that has since been lost? Or are we looking at evidence of a forgotten chapter in the development of human engineering? Because the money pit isn't simply a mystery about treasure, it's a mystery about knowledge. The remarkable thing is that the system appears to have been designed not merely to conceal something, but to keep it protected for an extraordinarily long period of time. The objective may never have been simply to hide the contents. It may have been to make sure they survived, and that distinction becomes extremely important when considering the reported discovery of a sealed chamber. If the underground complex was intentionally designed with sophisticated water defenses, then whoever built it may also have needed a way to protect the contents from the very environment being used to defend them. In other words, the same water that could keep intruders away would also pose a serious threat to anything stored underground. That raises another possibility. The builders may have developed methods for preserving valuable objects for generations. And if that's true, then whatever was found inside the chamber becomes even more significant. The truth on the scrolls. If the reported Oak Island discovery is eventually authenticated, and especially if the artifacts truly demonstrate a connection to the Knights Templar, then this could represent far more than the successful conclusion of a centuries-old treasure hunt. It could mark the beginning of an entirely new historical investigation. The potential consequences would reach into archaeology, medieval history, maritime exploration, and our understanding of how the Americas were connected to Europe before Columbus. That's why the story is so controversial. The biggest revelation wouldn't necessarily be the gold. It would be what the existence of the vault could tell us about the people who supposedly built it. For centuries, the conventional story has placed Columbus's 1492 voyage at the center of Europe's arrival in the Americas. Although evidence of earlier contact is known and debated, Claims of pre-Columbian European expeditions have often been treated with considerable skepticism. But if an authenticated Oak Island vault could be reliably dated to the medieval period and conclusively connected to the Templars, the implications would be enormous. It could demonstrate that an organized European group reached North America generations before Columbus. And if the site truly represents a sophisticated long-term base or repository, it would raise an even bigger question. How much did medieval Europeans actually know about the Atlantic world? One discovery like that wouldn't simply add a new paragraph to history books. It could force historians to reconsider entire chapters of the story. The Templars themselves would no longer be remembered solely as a European military and religious order. Their history would suddenly become part of a much larger story involving exploration, navigation, trade, and the movement of people and knowledge across continents. But even then, the gold and silver might not be the most important discovery. The scrolls could be. Imagine opening a document that has remained sealed away for centuries. Imagine finding writing created by the very people at the center of the mystery. What could those pages contain? Lost religious writings, philosophical ideas, records of journeys, maps, technical knowledge, or perhaps information about beliefs and traditions that disappeared from the historical record long ago. This is where the mystery becomes almost impossible to resist. Some theories surrounding the Knights Templar claim that members of the order encountered ancient traditions and knowledge during their time in the Middle East, and potentially preserved information that later disappeared or was suppressed. Those claims remain highly controversial and should not be treated as established fact. But if the reported scrolls genuinely exist and can be authenticated, their contents could finally allow researchers to separate historical evidence from centuries of speculation. A readable text would be more powerful than 1,000 theories. It could tell us what the people who created the vault actually believed, what they knew, where they came from, and possibly why they went to such extraordinary lengths to protect what they left behind. And that may be the real significance of Oak Island. The treasure may have been recovered, but the mystery hasn't been solved. It may have only become much bigger. Because the most important question isn't simply what was buried beneath Oak Island. It's what truth were its builders willing to hide for centuries. If you want to uncover more mysteries, forgotten discoveries, and secrets buried in the pages of history, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications.